Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I think, this idea of like disrupting from the inside, right? Where like the best disruptors are the people who really know what they're doing. And so I think that what I took from my time in traditional publishing, which was 13 years, is that there are some systems that really do function well inside of traditional publishing, right? Like there's access and there is the way that books ought to be created. There's professionalism, there's all these things that really matter. And so on that level, we're offering all of those things to our authors, all the things that I think are essential to being a good published author. And yet, I guess the contrarian point is like there's a lot of people who think or thought it's changing and has changed, certainly, that the entire idea of investing here is like less than, that there's some problem with it. And yet, on the side of making films or music or whatever, that's just not a stigma. And so
Yeah.
I think that publishing has changed in that way, of like authors taking the reins a bit more. I mean, self-publishing has opened that up, of course. And so in traditional publishing, there's this notion that like authors shouldn't be involved in anything. You turn in your manuscript and then you just say yes to everything that the publisher tells you. And so what we're doing is different. I mean, we're enrolling the author in a lot of education. So a lot of the things that seem contrarian are like obvious. They should be happening everywhere. And partly that's also like just being more transparent, right? And so many industries, not just book publishing, are very not transparent. But that was one of the goals that I always had in starting these imprints, that we
No.
would be very transparent to our authors.
So speaking of other industries, especially like with music, do you think even like a 360 deal would work in form of right? I know it's a little different, but I'm just curious of how that might work even in publishing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You're saying like the splits.
Yeah, because like when music, it's like yeah, it's like in the 360, I think it basically works out each you get 50% of everything that goes. So it's like whether it's touring, press, movie rights, like that all gets
Right.
spun into your whole deal. So I was wondering
Got
if any
it.
publishers have ever thought even of doing something like that, where
Well, I mean, I think that is reserved for like the biggest and the best
yeah,
deals that are coming out of traditional publishing, where they're throwing everything because they really want that author. And so they
mm,
will say, like you're getting publicity and you're getting, the full 9 yards. And the problem with that is that it's the 1% that get that treatment.
exactly.
And what the publisher takes is a lot, right? So like they might throw a lot of money at you and all these incentives, but then what you're getting is like 7% of royalties. And while, it's almost like a little bit of a devil's bargain because you're saying, oh, cool, like I'll take 100 grand and I'll get a tour and I'll get all of this stuff. If it works out for you, then that's awesome. Like if you sell enough books and you become, a desirable author on that list. And again, that's just, it's few and far between that usually works out for. And for the others, they end up being pariahs in essence because they didn't earn out,
Yeah.
and the publisher threw all this money at them. And so I just think it's a little bit of a problematic setup. Like when it works, it works. And when it doesn't, the author kind of gets screwed. And so, certainly those 360 deals aren't something that we're looking at in hybrid. And it's just in the sense that it's the authors are investing, but certainly the authors are looking at all the different things that they can do. And I've found it really interesting that lately authors are choosing to spend more money, for instance, on advertising
Yeah.
than they are on publicity, right? So there's shifts that are happening in the industry of, authors just being more savvy about where to spend their money.
Yep. And then so tell us about those early days of starting your company, She Writes Press as well as Spark Press. Like getting customers, getting authors, like how that all work.
Yeah, the early days were interesting for me because I started She Writes Press. And at the time, shewrites.com was kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
It was a platform for women writers. It sort of felt like Facebook. It actually kind of felt more like Substack. Like you could put articles on it and it had a big membership. So we started She Writes Press on top of that platform. So there was already sort of a built-in market of people who were interested in publishing. So we have had the great luxury of never having to advertise, almost
Yeah.
out the gate. People were like, cool, that's interesting. What are you doing? And it grew much, much faster than I ever could have imagined. And then Spark Press came around about 2 years later when I partnered with Crystal Patriarch, who is our CEO. She had an imprint and I had She Writes. And the two actually were very similar. Like she was doing something hybrid and she was looking for a publisher and I was looking for someone who could do publicity.
Yeah.
So we partnered and became, one entity with two imprints. But the presses are, they function the same way, but that's the story of why there are two imprints.
Yep, that makes sense. And then so from that, like how do you share some of those like important initiative or ideas in the space? I know that you tend to be like more of a literary agent, I mean activist in this space. So I read your blog. So just like what are some of those ideas that you're really trying to push in this space so that people continue to have different alternatives and routes in publishing?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I mean, I think the subs you're talking about blog, I started, because I have a lot of things I want to say about book publishing. I mean, I write about writing sometimes, but also about publishing. I like to point people's attention to things, I mean, I like to talk about fairness, certainly I like to advocate for hybrid because I think it's bullshit that people are still trying to insist that traditional is the only or the best way. And it's not to disparage traditional, it's just to say most people are not going to get a traditional deal. And so having the open conversation about alternate paths to publishing to me is quite important. I mean, publishing is a wild space, and I mean, it's just had so much around like diversity, equity, and inclusion in the last few years. And so stories come up. I like to weigh in, just sort of say like, look, this is what's happening. And I feel like I have a perspective that is like just from being a long time person in this industry and having come at it from a lot of different angles and seeing a lot of change. And so I'm whatever sparks my curiosity, but I oftentimes am fueled by the things that bother me.
Mhm.
And then try to sort of make sense of them and point things out to my readers so that they can see what's what in the industry.
Yep, that makes sense. And that's very much again how a founder really thinks in the sense of I see a problem in the world. I believe I'm the type of person that can make a change in it. Or sometimes it's the reluctant founder where it's like, I know I'm the right person for this space that I have to go do it. But either way, it comes from that space of wanting to do something important for the world and help those that have voices and in these stories that should be told. If you enjoyed that clip, make sure you head over to www.bookumapp.com to download our app so you can connect with your favorite bookish content creators, start conversations, and start your own book club.